Welcome back, everybody. It's Friday, January 16th, 2026. A couple of famous Alabamians share this birthday. There's Brent Hinds of Pelham, born in 1974. He's the guitarist for the Atlanta metal band Mastodon. So maybe that's not your cup of tea. But he also has played with the surfabilly band Fiend Without a Face and several classic rock bands like the Blood Vessels and the Giraffe Tongue Orchestra. Still not ringing a bell? Well, it's also the birthday of Anniston-born Jonathan Allen, former Crimson Tide All-American, formerly with the Washington Commanders and now a Minnesota Viking. He turns 31 and has spent part of his time off the field working with youth at homeless shelters because of his experience as a foster child. At the end of the day, he says, kids who are going through trauma need to know, and should know, people are in their corner. Today, a new law being considered by Alabama legislators would make it a felony to attack an elected official. A well-loved Alabama icon looks to be coming back to a familiar position. We'll let you guess which one. And speaking of icons, the letters of one of Alabama's most well-known figures are casting new light on some of her most closely guarded secrets. I'm Bill Thornton. Ike Morgan is still on vacation and may currently be stuck inside the It's a Small World ride at Disney World for all we know, so think kindly of him. We're down in Alabama. An Alabama lawmaker is proposing a bill that would make it a felony to attack an elected official. Alabama State Senator Chris Elliott is sponsoring the bill that would add current and former elected officials to a list of protected professions. AL.com's John Sharp writes that under the proposal, an assault against someone in one of those roles would be a Class C felony, punishable by up to 10 years in prison. The legislation is also expected to add traveling health care workers, pharmacists, and social workers. Now, Alabama law also offers legal protection from harm to police officers, firefighters, corrections officers, emergency medical service personnel, utility workers, teachers, and postal workers. Assaults against them while they're on their jobs carry enhanced penalties. But believe it or not, some lawmakers are bristling at this idea. While they agree with the sentiment, some like Senator Will Barfoot are reluctant to place politicians in the same protected category as, say, emergency responders. I do think when you put people in a certain classification and treat them above others, that's a problem, Barfoot said. The legislation was inspired by an attack last September involving a Bay Minette council member, which resulted in a criminal misdemeanor conviction for an attorney. The fact that this is even being debated is probably a good reminder that we might all collectively want to dial it down a notch. If you want to get excited about something, there is the return of a genuine symbol of Alabama know-how and determination. No, Nick Saban is staying at ESPN. What's coming back is the familiar Saturn 1B rocket to the Alabama Welcome Center on Interstate 65 in Ardmore. Work is currently continuing on a replacement for the one that stood there for 40 years, welcoming visitors to the state, AL.com's Scott Turner is reporting. State Representative Andy Witt says the U.S. Space and Rocket Center in Huntsville is overseeing the design and construction of the rocket. A Saturn 1B which had been at the Welcome Center was demolished in November 2023 at the direction of NASA after it had deteriorated from 40 years of weathering to the point where it could not be restored and was a hazard. Yet that rocket was the backdrop for an untold number of photographs as people stopped by the roadside, as well as a reminder of Alabama's pivotal role in the exploration of space. There's no timetable for when the rocket will return. When it does, it will be a replica of the launch vehicle. Saturn 1B, incidentally, was one of the rockets used in the early days of the Apollo program that eventually landed Americans on the moon. The larger Saturn V carried the men, but the Saturn 1B was employed in the missions that set up the lunar explorations, and it was later used for Skylab in the 1970s. Now, there's a name from the past. Speaking of names, here's another, Nell Harper Lee. The Alabama native who achieved worldwide fame with her novel To Kill a Mockingbird may have died almost 10 years ago, but she's still making news today through a long-running correspondence she maintained with another Alabama writer. A story the New York Times recounts how Lee and JoBeth McDaniel met in the 1980s. McDaniel, then in her 20s, also came from a small town in South Alabama. But Lee, who had by then already long given up granting interviews, used the letters to air some of the opinions she would never have divulged to a reporter. For example, her opinion of her former next-door neighbor in Monroeville, fellow author Truman Capote. You may recall that Capote, who died in 1984, invited Lee to accompany him to Kansas to research her own bestseller, In Cold Blood. Later, Capote dedicated the book in part to her, but she felt she should have gotten more credit for the work she did in researching and interviewing sources for it. Of Capote, Lee wrote, "Every lousy deed, and there were many, of his life arose from his being intensely jealous of someone or envious of his possessions." And then there's her opinion of her fellow white Southerners, whose reactions to the demands of the Civil Rights era in no small part inspired both her more famous novel and the later Go Set a Watchman. Many Christians were challenged for the first time to be Christians, Lee wrote. What was heartbreaking was to discover that people you loved, friends, relatives, neighbors, whom you assumed were civilized, harbored the most vicious feelings. Incidentally, Ms. Lee's latest book, The Land of Sweet Forever, came out last October, if you're looking for something to read. Thanks again for listening. Come back next time and we'll share what's going on down in Alabama. Until then, you can check out these stories and many more at al.com.